Hey fam, it's been quite a while since I've been on the podcast. It's been a while since we have been
This is true.
on the podcast together. It feels like forever.
This is the first one that we've done together that's not had video on it.
Right. So hopefully good stuff coming your way.
You can listen to our beautiful voices
Oh
now.
my. At least one of us.
Wow. I'm not even going to ask which one.
But hey man, we are back in full swing, hopefully. And today, Zach and I just kind of wanted to cover one topic that has been, I think, is just a major issue in the human heart. Every person struggles with this, whether you're a young person, whether you've been on this earth for quite a while. Despite your color, despite your socio-economical background, every person struggles, right? with contentment. And so today Zach and I are just going to talk about contentment, just kind of the issues that come from contentment, the dangers, and Zach is going to give us some of his wisdom of what he has been.
My wisdom.
He's gonna share some of his wisdom just on what he has learned about contentment, discontentment, and just kind of the ugly heads that show up when it comes to the issue of contentment.
Yeah.
So Zach.
Yes.
Are you ready?
Yes.
I'm going to interrogate you.
Yes. I've taught on this subject many times.
Yeah.
And I think it's important. So that's why we're kind of doing this question answer style.
Because
I already had like tons of notes on this.
Rate your current contentment level on a scale from 1 to 10.
Oh my. I'd say like a 9.
A 9. Ooh. I don't think I've ever made it to a 9.
Yeah, I think I'm doing pretty good right now.
That's
I don't know.
If
lots of new things happening that are good and fun. The one that the 10th point is for sleep.
Oh yeah.
My sleep sucks, but
then it's a 10 out of 10.
Then it would be a 10.
So if you guys are listening right now, just do a little rough assessment of where you think your contentment levels are, and then after this episode, see if you actually start to incorporate these things, which is really good advice for each and every one of us to take away from, if you see any increase in that rating.
yeah, and let us know.
Yes, do.
Because that would be cool.
Do let us know.
If you guys message us and was like, yo, I feel more content today, and that would be cool. Let us know. All
Jesus. So Zach, first question for you.
I'm getting sweaty in here.
Where does this issue with contentment really come from? Like, what is the root of contentment, or even discontentment, really?
Yeah, so to me, I think at the heart of not being content is insecurity. I think we're all insecure about things, whether it be our looks or our literal security, as in like how confident we are in just life in general. If we don't feel secure in who we are or what we have, we become discontent. We're not content. Because that means that if we're insecure about something, we want something to be different.
Right.
Which means we're not content with where we are. And there's something healthy about, we have to recognize that like we're sinners and we're sinful beings. And so we shouldn't be spiritually content with where we are. But in terms of, like material things like possessions and how we look and like who we are, like as a human, like personality wise, that's where insecurities come in and we don't feel content in who we are. And to me, I think that's all about where we find our value and where our focus lies. I think in many situations, it's all about focus.
Yeah.
And so, if our focus is on what other people think of us, then we're never going to be content, because there's always going to be people who are higher in status than us, who have more things than us, who are prettier than us. Yeah. I was going to make a joke, but I'm not going to. There's always going to be someone who we feel is higher than us on some scale or on some plane of existence.
And it always changes.
Yeah, and that standard always changes.
Yeah.
And so you're never going to be content if you're always focusing on what other people think about you. But then the flip side of that is if you focus on what God thinks about you, God loves you, God sees you as valuable, God sees you as a son or a daughter in Christ, then you're going to feel a little better about yourself because God, the all-knowing creator of the universe, looks at you and says, I made you who you are. You should be satisfied with that. And so the worst part about that insecurity is then it causes us to compare to others and to want what other people have. And the Bible has a word for this. They call it coveting. It's in the 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, right? Exodus 20? I almost said Exodus 30.
It is Exodus 20.
And so we start coveting and we start looking at what other people have and we say, I want that instead of what I have. I'm not satisfied with what I have. And so instead of looking at God, we start looking at each other, and our focus gets shifted from God to one another. And that's dangerous. I think that's really dangerous. I think the most important thing we can learn how to do is to keep our focus on God, vertically rather than horizontally to each other. Because we're never going to like what we see if we look around us, because everyone's broken. The world is broken.
Even the people that we're coveting.
Yeah, for sure.
Coveting someone else.
Yeah, the people. Yeah, for sure. The people that we're comparing ourselves to are comparing themselves to somebody else. And so it's just, especially with like social media, people put out these false perceptions of like, oh, well, I'm super happy with what I have. Right. And we're like, oh, well, I want that life. So then we start coveting that person. But they are for sure looking at somebody else being like, oh, well, I wish I had that as well. And so it's just like a vicious circle.
It is.
Cycle. So yeah, I think the issue with not being content really comes from where we place our focus, where we place our value, and looking at others instead of looking at God. I think that would be
that's really good
summed up answer.
Really good.
In a nutshell.
That's really good. I actually read an article on the Desiring God website the other day. John Piper. Plug to John. He's awesome. And we're talking about contentment on this podcast. We talk about a lot of different issues, human issues, heart issues, all those. I almost said good stuff, but it's not really good stuff. All this good stuff. But
beneficial stuff.
But what I read in the on the website was basically how even though we have issues like discontentment and all these things that we all struggle with individually, man's biggest issue, every single man's biggest issue is sin,
and woman.
Man and woman's biggest issue. Nah, just man. Listen, Eve was deceived. Adam sinned.
Okay. We'll leave that for another episode.
So obviously every man's biggest issue is sin.
Oh gosh, that was my chair squeaking. Need to sit still.
And so basically what the writer was saying is that we all need to develop a solid understanding of sin. What is sin and what is the payment of sin? Because if we understand that the payment of sin is actually death, right? The wages of sin is death. And we realize that we all are deserving of death. Anything else is then cause for thanksgiving or contentment, like you were saying. Because when we look at all these other people, what they have, and we start to measure ourselves with other people, we're always going to be discontent. But when we realize that the real issue isn't if I have enough or if I'm measuring up to this person, but the real issue is the fact that I'm a sinner. Like that's my main issue. And I understand what it means for me to be a sinner and what I deserve as a sinner. When I have little, I understand that this is even more than I deserve. Like God is giving me as a debit, like, do you know what I'm trying to say?
No.
like I deserve 0. No, I deserve like minus 1,000, but he's giving me like over what I deserve.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the term is, but I think you get what I'm trying to say.
I hope they get what you mean.
I hope so too.
You guys get what you mean, right? Yes.
It's like when you're supposed to get your change back and they give you more than what you actually paid, You don't give it back. You're not like, excuse me, you gave me too much.
Yeah, I totally give it back.
I'm sure.
Totally. I'm a good person.
Awesome. So second question, no comment.
Okay.
Is contentment. So what are the dangers of contentment? Because I feel like with contentment, it's one of those things, just like comparison that I spoke to with Emma a while ago. Emma's awesome. Go check her out.
Plug.
Plug. We don't think that there's any true dangers. It's like, oh, well, I'm just comparing myself with this person, but it's not really doing anything. You know, how is it affecting me, or what danger is there really at the core of this? What would you say the dangers are of discontentment?
Yeah, I would say it definitely leads to envy, uncontrolled, if it's uncontrolled. I think that we're all discontent on some level. It's the degree to which you let it take control of you, and that if you don't leave it, if you don't control it in a healthy way, it does lead to envy, and that leads to, I mean, you start like disliking people. You know, if I like covet you for what you have and it like gets out of control, like I'm gonna start not liking you simply because you have something that I don't.
Even though you did nothing.
And you did like nothing wrong, and especially in the church, that's dangerous because you can't have those kind of rifts between people. That's dangerous.
I can attest to that. Like, I've had times where, honestly, my annoyance with someone was really, the core of it was the fact that there was something about them or like their life or whatever that I was like, that I envied or, compared myself to. And then you do start disliking that person. And there's really no reason for that. And if you have those people in your life, ask yourself why you feel that way about them. Maybe it's just because you're actually envying them.
What's really interesting is that coveting, which is another word for basically not being content and wanting something that somebody else has, it really leads to Dennis Prager doesn't lead to Dennis Prager. Dennis Prager, who's I believe he's Jewish. He has a lot of good videos out on the Bible, even though he is Jewish. And go check it out. It's I think if you type in like Dennis Prager coveting on YouTube, it'll come up. Because he has this whole series on like the 10 Commandments. Anyways, he does this whole video on coveting, and I usually show it when I teach on coveting or on contentment. And he talks about how coveting is the one commandment that leads to other commandments, like violating other commandments. Because he talks about how like the other commandments are murder, or the other ones, I think he said, that are like relating to other humans are murder, adultery, stealing, and lying. And he was like, a lot of murders get committed because of coveting, because of not being content. Adultery is obviously a direct result of not being content, like because you see this woman and you're like, I don't have her, and then you're gonna take her, and that's like adultery. Stealing is obviously a result of not being content because you want something and you take it. Bling, bling. And then lying is usually to cover up the other ones.
Here we go with the vicious cycle again.
Yeah, and so coveting has way more connotations than we realize, and it affects us in all these different ways. And I think the biggest danger of not being content is that it devalues Jesus and the sacrifice he made on the cross. Because we start saying like, if only I had this, I'd be happy.
Jesus
and what you're
plus
really
something.
and what you're really saying is, if only I had this plus Jesus, like Jesus isn't enough. I need this as well. Right. And Jesus didn't die for us to want more things. He died for us to be satisfied and to come back to the Father. And since he's the only way to the Father, he's all we need to get to God. We don't need something else. We don't need another phone or another car to get to heaven, right? Yeah. We should be content with Jesus. And I'm not saying there's anything inherently bad with those things, but when they become things that we need, rather than just things that we want and are nice, then that's dangerous because we've lowered Jesus in our standards of contentment. And really, like I said earlier, if our focus is truly on God, we will be content with Jesus because he's the only way to God. And so if all we really want is God and that's our focus, like that, then Jesus is the only way to get to that. And so we should just be satisfied with Jesus. What's really ironic is that envy actually led to Jesus being crucified in the first place. And I didn't know this till I started researching for this. In Mark 15, 6-11, I believe Pilate is, you know what, I'm actually going to read it. in Mark 15. I believe it is when Pilate is talking. 1 second. Yeah, okay. Mark 15. It says, now at the feast this is talking about Pilate. Now at the feast he used to release for them any one prisoner whom they requested. And the man named Barabbas had been imprisoned with the insurrectionists who had committed murder in the insurrection. The crowd went up and began asking him to do as he had been accustomed to do for them. And Pilate answered them, saying, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? For he was aware that the chief priests had handed him over because of envy. And so what that's saying is because Pilate is trying to figure out, if you read through the Gospels, Pilate's actually like confused. If you don't know who Pilate is, Pilate's the dude who like, he's kind of like a judge.
Yeah, he judges the cases.
I think something like that. He kind of decides what gets done with people. And he basically, Jesus gets like put in his hands and Pilate's like, why the heck do you want to kill this guy? Like he didn't do anything wrong. Right. And he even comes to the realization like these people just want to kill him because they're envious of his ministry and who he is. And so, yeah, envy makes us do stupid things. I mean, it led to the crucifixion of Christ. Even in Acts 13, from verse 44 to 45, some of the Jewish priests come and they completely sabotage Paul and I think it was Paul and Silas. But Paul's ministry, they completely come and sabotage it because they're just envious of the amount of people that he drew because they want those crowds. Right. Even though they were Jewish people who knew what Paul was saying was correct, they still sabotaged the whole thing and didn't want people to hear the truth just because they were envious of the crowds. And so, yeah, it's very dangerous. It messes with our relationships on another level, which is why we need to keep it in check and be aware of it and all that stuff.
Yeah, totally. I think it's funny that like you were kind of linking this back to the time when Jesus was on the earth, which just shows us how like the human condition really changes, you know, like this has been an issue for a long time since the beginning. I mean, I don't know if with the whole garden situation, in a way there was discontentment in Adam and Eve, right?
Yeah.
Because they had God, they had the garden, they had all of these things that God had provided them, and it was all good, and yet that was not quite enough for them. They wanted more. So it's interesting to see that can even go back all the way to Genesis.
Oh, yeah.
One thing that I wanted to just kind of add is that when it comes to contentment, I think we often have this idea that contentment means having all these things that we think that we're owed. You know, we're owed these things. And I think for girls, that might come in the form of, I've been so faithful to God, and I'm following Jesus. Why isn't he bringing that someone into my life? Why isn't this happening or that happening? Not just specifically goals, but I think that it's easy to have the mindset of, I'm following Jesus, I'm praying, I'm being faithful, so I'm kind of owed these things that I desire. And that's that's a bad way of looking at Christ or looking at our relationship with Jesus. Because I think a lot of the times when we feel that we're being faithful or following Jesus, we think that he is now obligated to show up with his quote unquote best for us, when in fact his best is the idea that we have, you know. What I think I deserve or what I think is best for me is 99% not what God thinks is best for me at all. And my life goes this way. And I'm like, God, but that's not what I prayed for. And he's like, well, you're not God. I'm God. And I understand what I'm doing, because it goes far beyond the surface. And we just look at the surface. We just think right now, right here. And
for sure.
It's not the same with God.
Yeah.
Cool. Ready for your next question? I thought you were going to add something there.
No.
Okay, so what are the effects that discontentment has on us? Like what are some visible ways in which it shows up in our lives?
So two quick things. First of all, coveting robs us of two things. First of all, I said that twice. It robs us of the enjoyment of the things that we do have. You know, when you look at what someone else has, you know, guess what? You don't like what you have.
Well, I don't have a blue toy. I have a red toy.
Yeah. And suddenly you don't like what you have anymore.
Right.
I think if we all lived in isolation and didn't know what each other had, we would be completely happy with whatever we have.
Dude, can you imagine life without social media? Like,
yeah, for sure.
You're not aware of the person's new car and all those things. It would just be so different.
Yeah, I mean, a perfect example is like, if you're listening to this and you're single, you know what I'm talking about. Right? It's fun to be single. It's a nice time. You're free. You don't have any obligations.
I'm rolling my eyes.
But once you get around couples, then you're not content with being single anymore, right? Because then you're like, well, why can't I be in a relationship? Why am I not worthy of being? And then, you know what I'm saying? And so you guys get that. That's just one example. But we, you know, if we focus on what we do have and what God has given us, we would be content. And discontentment, it shifts our focus from what God has given us to what he hasn't. And that's that's always going to be, you're always going to want something more. Even if you get everything you ever desired, there's still going to be something you don't have, and you're still going to want that.
Use that as a quote on the page, please.
Okay. I'll do that. And the other thing coveting robs you of is your purpose for living. Because we get so wrapped up in the game of ranks and like, where do I rank with my friends? You know, where do I fit with being the best and having all the things and all of that stuff, that we forget Jesus has called us intentionally to become servants rather and to serve others.
That's good.
You know, Jesus is the ultimate example of that because he is the Son of God, and yet he humbled himself even to the point of death, and he came not to be served, but to serve. And so we're supposed to follow that example. And so when we are so wrapped up in trying to be better than everyone else and trying to have all the stuff like everyone else has, we forget why we're here and why we are Christians and what God has actually called us to do. Because that's not what he's called us to do. And so we forget about our true purpose and get distracted, I would say.
I agree. I think it's funny because when you think about discontentment or the standard that we were talking about that everyone is trying to meet, it's almost like, let's say the standard is a triangle shape. Illuminati. The standard is the triangle is the standard is a triangle shape, and here God has made stars and hearts and squares and whatever else shape you can get, and we're all trying to fit those shapes into this one thing. And it's kind of sad because it's beautiful to have differences and to bring different things to the table, different perspectives, different, like, we don't all have to look like Kylie Jenner, you know, not
Please
all
don't.
of us have the same, no, let's not be mean. we don't all have the same body or hair type. And it's sad to me when I see that everyone is trying to look the same in such a way that nobody stands out anymore because everyone looks the same, you know? What you were trying to achieve is actually giving you the reverse effect, because now you just kind of look like everyone else. You're just kind of doing what everyone else is doing when God has not purposed that for you. So
yeah, and I would well, I'll say that in the next question. That's more of advice.
Yeah, so next question. We are, of course, in this podcast, like, it wouldn't be helpful if we just said a bunch of things to you that might like feel good right now or encourage you, but we want to be able to have this podcast and especially God's word shape and influence and affect your life. And so we will try our best to have like an application part of the podcast when we do the podcast, which is what we're getting to now. So Zach, with all that has been said, what advice would you give to someone who is struggling with discontentment and how they can approach that in their life?
Yeah, I think the key verses for this is Philippians 4:11 through 13. I almost said 14. Everyone's heard Philippians 4:13, but
nobody's heard what comes before.
Nobody messes with what comes before it.
Yeah.
It says, "Not that I speak from want, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with humble means, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. You know, everybody's heard that last part. And we post it on walls. We put it on our status because we're like, I can do anything I want.
I've got a race today. I can do anything.
Yeah.
I've got an exam today. I can do
anything through Christ. Yeah. And really what Paul's saying there is he's like, no matter what I have, I can do what Christ has called me to do because I have him. And so it really is about contentment. Yeah. And, you know, Paul most likely wrote this letter on the floor of a jail cell in like the dark. You know, he was not
isn't this like the most joyful book or something that he's written?
Yeah, no. He's not at his peak.
Yeah.
This is like normal. This is probably worse than normal for him, and he's writing these things. I mean, he knows what suffering is. Like, go read 2 Corinthians 11. Please, go read that, because Paul suffered a lot of things that we will never have to deal with. But yet he says, you know, I have figured out the secret. And it's to choose to be satisfied with Christ. You know, he is enough. And so we want you guys to know, like, no matter what you're going through, you'll always have enough because you'll always have Christ. But you have to choose to be satisfied with that. You can't be focused on the other stuff. Another verse for this is 1 Timothy 6:5-6. It says, these people always cause trouble. Their minds are corrupt and they have turned their backs on the truth. To them, a show of godliness is just a way to become wealthy. And then it says, yet true godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. And so what it's saying is, if you're truly godly and you're content, like, that's the wealth that you could ever meet. And so we've talked about contentment. How do you get true godliness? How do we become more like God? And we would always say this. We always say it. Be in the Word and pray. Yeah. And ask Him to make you more like Him. But that's for a whole nother episode. And so really every day we have this decision, you know, are we going to chase the things that we don't have? Or are we going to choose to chase God? I love the verse in Ecclesiastes. I'm looking for it.
Ecclesiastes is a good book.
Ecclesiastes is very good.
Very short.
Chapter 4, verse 4. It says, I have seen that every labor and every skill which is done is the result of rivalry between a man and his neighbor. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. And so what he's saying is, like, every single thing we do often comes down to competition with somebody else because we're not content. We're coveting what somebody else has. And he says it's literally like chasing the wind. Have you ever tried to chase the wind? It's kind of pointless. You know, you're wasting your time if you do that. And so what we would ask you guys to do and advise you guys to do is to stop chasing the wind. Stop chasing what other people have. Stop chasing these things that you feel like are going to make you happy when you get them, and start chasing God and realizing that God is going to provide for you, and going to satisfy you in ways that the other things could never satisfy you. Even if you look like that perfect model that you think you want to look like, you're still not going to be satisfied. I promise you. Even if you get that thing that you think is going to make you happy, you're still not going to be satisfied. And so how do we do that? Honestly, one of the tips I would give is get off social media for
take breaks,
a week or 2 weeks, and see how it affects you.
Yeah.
Because it's easier now than it has ever been to not be content, because you can literally take 2 seconds to open an app on your phone and you start scrolling. It's not going to take you very long to find something that somebody else has that you want. So that would be the first step that I would suggest. Take a break from social media. See how that changes your perspective. And instead, spend that time in the Word. Spend that time in the Bible, and spend that time praying. And I bet you'll never go back. So that's what I have.
Awesome. And I think that the social media thing is so big, and I don't think we realize that, because I can personally say that 80% of my discontent, insecure feelings come from seeing things on social media. And then all of a sudden my whole mood and attitude and posture has changed because of that. Yeah,
and it really affects everyone differently as well. Like for me and Melissa have had this conversation.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't, I'm sure it affects me at some level, but like not
in the way it does me.
Not in the way it does most people.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out, that's why we said just try it and see what happens. Because for some people it's a big source of discontentment. For other people, they use it for other things. So just see what works for you. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No,
go ahead.
That's good stuff. Like the only thing that I would add, because he gave the big, like the main points, obviously, is
I need to oil my chair. It's very squeaky.
Please find contentment in Christ. But what I liked that Paul said was he has learned the secret to contentment. And so process. Basically, it's a process. Don't think that it's there's something wrong with me because I'm struggling with this. It's something that you learn. And just like everything else in life, you get better at it the more you practice. Yeah. And what Zach advised with being in the Word, with taking breaks from social media, those things add to your practice and add to the way.
Sorry, I just yawned and made a stupid face, and she's laughing at me.
So here's a practical way that you can do this right now. Right now. Yeah. Let's get off of social media for a while. But one thing that you can do is start by making a list of everything that you have that you don't deserve.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Do that one first, which I'm sure there's a lot. For me, there's a lot. Then make a list of everything you deserve that you don't have, such as God's wrath, such as separation from Christ. Because there's a lot of things that we don't have that we actually do deserve.
Bad things.
I'm not.
Don't put a Lamborghini on that list.
I was just gonna say that. I don't have this yet. And honestly, just kind of the takeaway from this practice is to allow yourself to see that when you pursue contentment in Christ, He helps you to see mercy and grace in all things. Whether you're going through a very difficult time right now, or you feel like Zach, like you're on a little high in your life.
It's a good time.
No matter the circumstance, just like Paul said, when you look at those two lists and you realize that even if the only thing you had on your list of I deserve this but I don't have it is the wrath of God, it outweighs the other list entirely.
Yeah, believe me, you don't want that.
That even when you're in a difficult situation right now, when you look at Christ, He will help you to see grace and mercy in every single circumstance. So we hope that you enjoyed this podcast. I think we enjoyed doing this one. I for one feel a lot more comfortable talking like this without a video.
There's no camera on our face.
And I'm not really as concerned about my stumbling and things like that. It's fine. We hope that you enjoyed this. We honestly hope that you take this to heart, because discontentment is a real disease, of our nation, of our world. And if you can take this to heart, apply this to your life, ask God to help you, you will be one of the very few people who has the remedy for discontentment, and other people will look at your life and ask you about it. How are you so okay with this? Yeah. How are you thriving in difficult circumstances? And that gives you an opportunity to lead them to Christ. Thanks, Zach, for sharing your wisdom with us today.
I tried.
You did very well. We will see you next week. This was fun. We hope you have an awesome week. Till next time.
Like and subscribe.
Share, tell your family and your friends and
in the world.
Everyone. Everyone.
No, but seriously, if this helps you, this is a big issue we all deal with. So if this helps you, don't hesitate to share it with people.
And listen to it again if you need to.
Yeah, for sure. And ask us questions.
Amen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
See you guys
next week.
Bye.